Good day, everyone. It is Thursday, which means we sit here and work on open source stuff while you watch. I'm Alan, and around me are the open source team at Anchore. We have Alex, Will, Chris, and Dan. And they are all very smart and can help me understand what's going on in the world of open source software, including Syft and Grype, which are two main stars of the show. Syft being our SBOM generator and Grype being the vulnerability scanner. We will potentially look at other tools as well. We do this every Thursday, and if you want to follow along, then subscribe. If not, you can watch it tomorrow. There'll be a link over on the social media for both Syft and Grype tomorrow. And watch it at 2 times speed on a Friday is quite a nice way to spend your day, I'm sure. If you want to see any of the code, it's all on GitHub, github.com/Anchor. We've got Syft and Grype and everything else is over there as well. And if you want to chat with us about anything, then I would recommend Discourse, which you can get to very easily. I mean, there's a link like just down here. There's the link to the videos, and then after Syft and Grype, I think there's somewhere down here. There's a link. Oh my god, there it is. Oh god, they're in the end. So the easier way to do that is just go anchor.com/discourse, and you find us. So, does anyone have... Hello, by the way. I keep forgetting that. Hello. Sorry.
Hello.
Does anyone have anything specific they wanted to bring up? Any, topics?
I think just the top of mind is that we're processing a release right now for the two Syft and Grype. One of us is on current at the moment in the act of doing that. So if you're following along live, you might see a new one pop out during this. If you're following along at home after the fact, go check it out, post it being released, watching this video, because there's a lot of cool new features there.
Excellent. Anything else? Or should we dive into the things that are marked as needing discussion? This one here, we can find in GitHub. We have a few. Which one did you want to go for? Will, is that the one you were after?
Yeah, I think this one might be kind of it's kind of a broad early request that just came out of our team stand up literally an hour ago. But it's kind of a bigger topic, and so I kind of wanted to bring it up today to see if the community has input and just to sort of see what it sounds like when we say it out loud. So the idea here is that right now Grype stores fix information, right? So if you have a version of a package that's vulnerable and the maintainers have released a patch, Grype will say, hey, you could upgrade to this version and tell you about the patch. And the request in this issue is to store other things that you could do besides a package upgrade. Because a strict package upgrade might not be available or might not be the right choice. An example might be a distro upgrade, right? Which makes many fixes available, but you didn't have. Or maybe sometimes people cease maintaining a package, but designate sort of a successor package. Right, there was that post where Mitchell Hashimoto said, hey, I don't really write Go anymore. All these repos are archived, and he has a little gist with like links to what he considers like some logical successors to some of those. And so it would be interesting to, in that case, like suggest replacing the package with the successor package. It would also be interesting, sometimes various Linux distros have, or the company behind them rather, has like extra support you can pay for. So maybe there's not a fix available in open source Ubuntu, but there is in Ubuntu ESM, which is like extended support modules or something. I don't know what the M is. But that might be interesting. So it might be like you could tell, hey, these CVEs have no fix today, but if I paid for Red Hat EUS, if I paid for Ubuntu ESM, they would have a fix. Or maybe you just need to upgrade your distro, but right now we don't say. Like if you're running, some some super old distro, we're going to find a bunch of vulnerabilities that are closed as won't fix because nobody at Debian or Canonical or whatever is actually working on those packages anymore, haven't been for years. So there's no fix available. But that's not really true, right? There is a fix available. The fix is to use a modern operating system. And Grype could tell you that. And so there's sort of two topics here, which is like, can we, like, how to store it and how to
present it to the
like
user.
how do we store it and how to present it to the user.
Yeah, so, sorry to throw you off by putting a different page up. I just wanted to highlight what you were explaining there. So, a typical CVE. You mentioned Ubuntu, so I just grabbed the security tracker. Yeah, they've got multiple releases, and some are no longer supported, or this issue is like not a problem there. And typically, you get told, right, you need to upgrade to these releases, but sometimes the version there will suggest ESM. I didn't actually pick one that has recent CVE. That one is that one. No, that's the one I was just on. I was going to look for. Actually, I'll look for FFmpeg. Is this search working? No, it isn't. Ah, rats. I was hoping to find one that had an ESM upgrade, so we could. Oh god, even worse. It's not even affected. Okay.
No, image magic was definitely the way to go.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, man, sorry about that. Come on, you gotta find one. There we go. This has got to be one. Oh my gosh, there's loads. Right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. I think it's just slow. Like I see Chrome spinning at the top.
There we go. Finally. So
Right.
For this particular CVE, like you were explaining, sometimes there'll be another version, but in this particular case, on that particular release, you would either you've got two paths, haven't you? You can either upgrade to the next version of the OS, or you can get this ESM package from the that additional repository that you have to have Ubuntu Pro. So those are your paths, right?
Right. And I think today, if you scanned like a jammy Ubuntu image with whatever package we're talking with image magic below that ESM version in it, Grype will just say not fixed. And that's interesting because like that's true in the sense that like without purchasing some software or upgrading your distro, there's not a fix, but it's not a very complete story. There are two things you could do, right? You could pay for the ESM packages or you could upgrade your distro. And it might be nice for a user to see that both those paths exist and then they can try to choose between them.
Right.
I think upgrading the distro is probably the most usual non-package upgrade suggestion because sort of any unmaintained distro, if there's a new distro and it was a CVE and a package that's present in both, they'll probably, or rather unmaintained distro version. Yeah, and there's all kinds of other interesting things like renames or like forks, right? It might be interesting if there's a CVE, like a late version Redis CVE that's fixed in Valkey and fixed in Redis. Might be interesting to see like, oh, hey, I have this Redis. I could upgrade to, this version of Valkey or this other version of Redis. Like, so there's a bunch of interesting situations where a user's response to the presence of a CVE might not just be, yum upgrade or, npm upgrade or whatever. So anyway, that's sort of the idea. Does anybody have anything they want to add now that we've kind of explained it?
I think the first one also reminds me of just like EOL stuff, like it, being able to say, like we have an open issue for that one too, which is like, you're about to you run off a cliff. Like we don't have an answer for what you should do, but this is EOL'd. Even would be a great. I think this mechanism would help in that case too. Am I wrong to think that?
So you mean like in other words, have like a remediation that means help is not on the way, do something else.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like a non-remediation.
Yeah, that's one of the ones in the CSAF spec. One of the remediation types is no fix planned. And so a vendor can say like, hey, this is super old software. We're not going to do anything about this. That case is kind of covered today by Grype's won't fix, but Grype's won't fix is sort of scoped to the distro, right? What like today when Grype says won't fix, it means that the distro feed for that like distro version says that they're not going to fix it. But that doesn't mean that it won't be fixed in a new version of the same distro.
Yeah, I think the EUL relationship, there is a relationship, but it's not quite that, I don't think. I think it's that typically the pattern of having a paid for service where you get security fixes, whereas the not paid for service you don't, is oriented around OSs that are technically EOL'd, right? So it's not a binary decision where like a distro version is not EOL'd and then it is. Like this is that padding mechanism that Canonical and Red Hat have, where it's like you're not ready to upgrade to the new version yet, but you can pay for access to security and bug fixes for that distro that we're not supporting anymore in the public non-paid for version.
Right.
Right.
Is
so
that
I do think that to me, in my mind, that's the relationship between the EOL concept and this topic.
is that what you were getting at, Alex, or were you getting at like more of like an EOL package or like an EOL like we're not going to work on this anymore kind of thing? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's close to what Dan is saying, but it's in the sense that like, well, I think users of Grype would want to know if they're, so say we find no vulns against an artifact, but we know the artifact, like the greater artifact itself is EOL'd. That's notable in and of itself because the upstream data may not even be reporting vulns anymore. And just the fact that it's EOL'd is very important from a security posture point of view. So it's like a mix of that and this like, no results doesn't mean a good thing.
Right. It just means true. The lights aren't on and no one's home to write any kind of vulnerability that may have come up.
Right. And even when Alan was showing the like Ubuntu security tracker, the first vulnerability we looked at, like the really old Ubuntu's, it just said needs investigation, right? Like we're not paying anyone to check out this super old code and see if it's vulnerable. Which is a reasonable decision, but that doesn't mean you're not vulnerable.
Yeah.
It probably means you are.
So to illustrate what you just said, this CVE 2021-20245, the one we were looking at, I just built a container on my machine that's 2204 and I just apt install ImageMagick, right? And sure enough, I get this version, which, what release did I say this was? 2204. Is that right? I think I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there is this build that's in there, 6911, 2204, and the column here that's got nothing in it is the fixed in column, right? Which suspiciously blank, given that we know that this issue is actually fixed in 2204 in that package, but currently we don't see that, we don't surface that data, right?
Right. And we right now that column means I could just, apt install a newer version, right? And that's not the case here. You have to do something else. And so this is the feature request to like have a way to write down in Grype that, there's something to do besides just upgrade the package. Chris?
I think I'm a little confused after that demonstration because are we saying all this would then be like an either or that goes in the fixed in column, or is it a new field that we would like surface to the UI?
I think it's a totally new field. And I really want a good name for it. Maybe one of our viewers will suggest a good name. Comment on the video with a good name or something. But it's like remediation besides package upgrade is what I want the name to mean, but I do not want to have a struct called remediation besides package upgrade because I don't enjoy typing that much.
I mean, I think even
But
just
yeah.
remediation.
Yeah,
is-
remediations is
is-
good. Yeah.
Because like,
Well,
I don't know, we could even consider like, deprecating the version field and encoding the version as a remediation itself. So they're all kind of underneath the same roof.
right. So then we have a remediation of type upgrade your package, and then we also have a remediation of type, get Ubuntu Pro, and we also have a remediation of type upgrade your distro, and we also have a remediation of type like
delete the package.
yeah, dude, just right.
Make it
This is
all- yes.
yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense, and I think that might. I think having sort of a remediation type rather than because right now Grype status stores like a fixed version, right? Like upgrade to at least this version to get the fix. But having a type of action there might be really helpful.
Nice. So this is something that's still up for discussion. We need to have a think about, but you've milestoned it for Grype 1.0, which we don't have a date for at the moment, but
Right.
it's certainly
And
something that would be good to have for then, right?
The reason we've done that is that 1.0, we're doing our best here to follow semantic versioning. So once we release Grype 1.0, we are committing not to make certain types of breaking changes until 2.0. And so if we're going to do something like rename a JSON key in the output or like totally rearrange the database or something, we'd like to do that before 1.0. So that's what that milestone really means, is that like this might entail a breaking change. So we want, by the time we solidify to the 1.0 like code and user interfaces, we would like to be done with this.
So thank you for explaining that. That then makes me wonder, like if the remediation type was upgrade your OS, would we, like for Jammy, would we show the next LTS, or would we say the most recent release, or are all three of those like potentially options? Because these packages are in the default archive for these three releases, so any one of those is a valid option, right?
Yeah, I think that's something we've talked about a little bit before, where there are many remediations available, and there's not a lot of room in the table output. So like we had a feature recently where we started sort of starring what seems like, or underlining or something, what seems to be like the best package version upgrade, meaning the one that crosses the least amount of semver but is forward, I think is the algorithm we settled on. So it's like,
oh, I think I've seen that.
Yeah.
So we used to suggest sort of every fixed version. But sometimes if the fix had been backported a million times, that would result in a really gross. I think if you scan an old JDK image, like one of the Eclipse Tamarins or images or something, you'll probably see it.
If you have a suggestion, I don't know one off the top of my head, but yeah, you get the fixed in here, and it might be a list that stretches this UI across, but one of them will be underlined, right?
Right, and that will be the one that sort of like looks most reasonable. Like we're trying to avoid suggesting a downgrade, and we're trying to avoid suggesting an upgrade by 27 major versions. Right, we're just saying like if you can get a patch version of the same version you're using, that's probably the lowest risk change. And that was an improvement suggested by a community member, because we used to suggest like if you scan something with OpenJDK and like the fix had been backported to like Java 8, we would suggest like, oh, you have a vulnerable version of Java 17, and like one of the things you could do is switch to Java 8, like patch 457 of Java 8, which nobody really wants to do. So it's a little bit of a similar problem, and I think one of the things the user might know is like the user might know like, hey, do we have budget for like paid distro support? They might know, do we have the risk appetite to upgrade 3 distro versions? We don't know that. So I think there's probably some configs here. Yeah, just like this. See how so what we're doing is we're saying sort of basically that like, technically this CVE is fixed in Python 2.7.17, but 3.5.8 is the least impactful upgrade that fixes this specific thing.
That's a perfect
It's what that
example,
little
actually, because you're
underline
not going to want to
means.
do that, are you?
Well,
Yeah.
there's certain instances where you do want to do that, but only as long as you're not playing whack-a-mole with the CVEs that come up because of it, right? Because like you could play a game where you whacked and went down, but then you got 3 more, and then you whack those and go up to the like latest one. You're just like basically you're bounding around the graph to find the most efficient result. But this hopefully with this algorithm, you just go straight to the path of least CVEs against named version.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it's and so it's going to recommend sort of the earliest fix that's an upgrade.
Nice.
It's basically what it's going to recommend, and it's still take recommend with a grain of salt because I think it's still recommending an EOL Python there, and you should not run EOL Python. But
right, and this is your software, and you're running it on your infrastructure. You have to take some responsibility. Don't just ask us what you should do in this instance. We'll give you a recommendation, but you're the one who's being paid to do this.
Well, I know I made a tongue-in-cheek like delete the package comment earlier, but if you're like actively like remediating security vulnerabilities like in your own environment, then sometimes downgrading is the correct choice because the security alert was introduced in the latest patch of the release that went out, right? You don't always have to wait for something to fail forward and like, oh my God, there's no fix for it yet, right? You can go back in time and use the thing that was approved before. So like downgrading is always, it's not always like an incorrect choice is kind of what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, absolutely. Sweet.
I was also going to side note on that one, because if we suddenly have the ability to enumerate potential ways to get rid of this vulnerability in the material you just scanned, we sort of chuckled at the delete the package, but there could potentially be the option to say like, this package has no dependence and it's vulnerable. You might want to consider removing it. Right? We can't tell people that that's what you should absolutely do, because it could be the top level art thing that is the purpose of that container or whatever. But it might not be. Like you might, have a base distro that's got some stuff in it, and you're starting to see vulnerabilities, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, my thing doesn't actually need curl or whatever in it, and so yeah, I'll get rid of it.
I think the naval term for that is a stowaway.
As long as and I think it gets kind of to the crux of it. Whereas right now we're trying to display one piece of information that says, you are able to fix this by doing this. And we're sure of that because there is a fix available. It's available to everybody, But if we break that out into like, there's a universe of options. We can't tell you which one is appropriate for you. There's some other interesting stuff we can put into those records.
and I think there might be some really interesting like hypothetical analyses. Like if you're in the example of scanning some server that's running old Ubuntu, you might say like, oh wow, we have like, upgrading to the latest LTS gets rid of 2/3 of these CVEs, which might be important from a planning perspective, right? Because it's obviously it's sort of more risky than upgrading a single package, but it can help you sort of like do a couple hypotheticals, like how does my ability to patch this stuff look if I get ESM? How does my ability to patch this stuff look if I go to the next LTS? How does my ability to patch this stuff look if I just go to the latest version? Those are sort of interesting questions. So yeah, I think there's a lot of like UX work in it, because the table display just doesn't have enough pixels for all this information. But yeah. Anyway, so
as a side note on the not enough pixels, there is a PR that's open in Grype that like, we were just saying like, hey, for these like really old images, it's that fixed versions goes on forever. It does truncate and like kind of de-emphasize the ones that we're not really recommending. So there, because we don't need a table is supposed to be a summary output. It's not supposed to be like enumerate everything. And so we don't need us. So if we're going to summarize, we should truncate in those cases. And so now we're going to start to do that.
I'm afraid I've just heard we've got some breaking news. If I just go back here, I think we've got a new version of Stereoscope has just been released while we're discussing. Well done, Alex.
Yes. Yes, the release train is currently going. So I've got one extra test in Grype going, but I think by the end of this live stream, probably we'll have a fully released release train.
Nice.
See if I can get that challenge in.
Excellent. Yeah.
Are we
That's
done
why I'm
with
a little quieter.
Sorry. Are we done with the release topic?
I think I was just gonna say I think we're done talking about this particular Grype issue. But let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. If I missed a use case or if I missed a subtlety or something, or if you have an idea for how it should look like, let us know. Please comment on this.
Sweet. Right. Let me close that, and that. And
Okay.
we have that one. Is this?
Yeah, I added needs discussion to that, and I also asked the poster of it, like the original requester, a question, and when I checked a minute ago, they had not answered. So I'm not sure it makes sense to discuss that one. I might have added. We added needs
discussion because I think we thought maybe the person would get back to us. But the crux of this is, and if you scroll down to Will's question, we're not sure if the user is asking for us to do kind of a pass through of the checksum values that like the package databases provide for certain packages in a Linux distro, or if they're asking us to actually find and assert on the file the tar or the .deb or whatever, however it's sourced, and do the integrity checks ourselves and pass that value up into the SBOM. So we're trying to figure out where and how we would want to get these values from and what's kosher as far as revealing and servicing, again, security verification checks for packages in an SBOM after scanning it. And this is specifically for the Cyclone DX format.
We have examples of both in the output today. So, and maybe that's what you said below, Will. I didn't read the
I didn't.
response.
I didn't realize we had examples of both. So the question was like in Cyclone DX, like I got file digests but not package digests. Why don't I get package digests? And so you say sometimes you get package digests. That's news to me. So that might be interesting to talk about.
Well, I still might be misunderstanding. Here's what I answered, and tell me if I just got this wrong. So today we have digests that are claims in like I say package database like RPM, and we will raise up those as part of like package metadata saying, hey, in the RPM database there's an entry and it says this should be the digest. And then we also, when we like calculate digest for all files on disk or like own files on disk, we will raise up digests on the files that we scan. So we have two spots in the SBOM. And the nice thing about that, so we actually don't do any verification. And the reason why is the SBOM document is just supposed to be a way for someone to verify. So now you can take this single document and you can do a self-verification saying, I've got all the claims in the database. I have all the, the claims of what the actual digests are, cross-validate. If I see any differences, something's wrong.
Okay, that's interesting though, is the claim in the database, like if we see like a package manager database that has the like digest of the deb or RPM that was installed, do we expect that file to still exist and have a digest in the SBOM? That was sort of what I was, this seemed, so I guess that's one question, is like often the package manager, like sort of digest, like the checksum you see on the download page is on an ephemeral artifact, right? It's not on something that's in the file system after you're done installing. And so we might not be able to do exactly what this person is asking. And then the other thing is if we could make sure that that works in Cyclone DX, that bit of metadata ends up attached to the Cyclone DX digest. That might be testing we could do offline or something, but it could be that like if they're package digests, they end
It's
up in the SIP pack.
Yeah,
Where
it's
did-
currently not now. Well, yeah, what Alan's highlighting right there, the properties, we would take
Yeah.
those properties where it has the value SHA-256, and sometimes we get like the MD5 and other things, but we would take those and also make sure that those are on a component that's part of like a Linux package manager, because I don't want to be
Well,
wrong
to be
about it,
honest,
because those
this
might
is
be the actual shot of the
This is
file.
the one that I made earlier with Ubuntu 22.04, and I didn't remove the depackaged database, so that is there.
That's
Right. So on the metadata, it should be part of like metadata, SHA-256, and then the value. What package is this right here? This is bash.
Bash.
And keep scrolling down. There's properties, Syft package, Syft location. It'd be further down. None of that. None of that. It's part of the metadata.
Well, I don't think it's Cyclone. It's gonna. It
No.
probably doesn't show it.
As long as it's maybe it wouldn't show it, but there's a field on metadata for a depackage kind of component that would show the hash that's stored in the package database, and that is what you would want to transfer over to. There's like a child field of component called hashes, and you would just go, oh, if this is Syft metadata SHA-256, right, with the value, I would want to, instead of it being there, they want it to be on the. Again, there's a named field called hashes that's part of the Cyclone DX spec, where people would expect this value to be as part of the package.
right. And the feedback from this issue is basically you're putting the hashes property on files, but not on libraries or not on
Right.
And
Yeah.
and so I wonder like do if we do that on like Syft, if we do it in Syft JSON, does the digest from the package manager show up in like the depackage metadata?
That's a good question.
So I thought that it did. We do get MD5 sums for stuff out from the depackage information.
Okay, it could
comes
be
from
that that's just not making it in the translation to CDX too, and this is just a simple bug then.
Yeah, and if you're trying to look this up like at home, the command on like an Ubuntu system you could run is like apt-cache show and then package, and then the apt-cache show like ZURL or something, right? Like that'll give you a list of the SHAs and MD5 sums for the package that you would potentially want to see under the metadata properties that would then get lifted up into that hashes field for Cyclone DX for this.
So this is a
What-
Syft format JSON of the same container that hasn't had the depackaged database deleted. Where
Right.
should I find the hashes?
Alex, what
There-
were you going
there-
to ask?
Might be a
Sorry.
metadata field on the artifact. Maybe it's called depackage metadata. Maybe it's just called metadata. I can't remember.
Yeah, just keep scrolling down until you see metadata, and then you'll see
Yeah.
underneath files. You're right there at the bottom of your screen.
Oh. God. I've broken it. Oh my
Slash
god.
metadata.
Oh, there.
Yep.
Right.
No,
in
keep
that
going.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, there we go.
Right.
So for each one of these,
Oh,
there's a
those are
path to
files.
digest.
Yeah, so that's interesting because we're still we only have a digest of the files. So like,
Well,
but
that's
I
kind of
think-
my question. Like what is the definition of a package digest here? It's like, is it the deb? Is that what you were saying earlier, the thing that we don't have anymore?
I'm not sure. It looks like Dan and Chris both have
Go ahead,
are
Chris.
trying to get our attention.
Go ahead, Dan.
No, I was just gonna say, like, that's what, I was trying to interpret the question, right? There's a top level component that says, like, apt, and it's a Debian package, right? So there's a top level component that's a Debian package. We don't have a hash for that. We have hashes for all of the files in the Debian package that are in a different place. I'm pretty sure this issue that user's saying, the top level components in our business process requires, or we want to see a hash. The question is, what do we put there? Do we put the hash of the original deb that was installed? Is that in the Debian metadata? I think, folks, I don't think it is.
No, yeah, it's not.
So the question is, what do we put there, right? Because
Right. Yes.
Alan found it. Yes.
there it is.
Yay!
And-
The The command I remembered didn't, it actually worked.
Yeah, I know it's there in like there's like a bunch of like Debian metadata on the repositories. So, deferred conversation to like how to validate this stuff. But if that information is present, then, I think one possible answer to this particular issue is, yes, for Debian, they wrote down the SHA-1, 256, and 512 of the package that was installed.
Specifically, it's of the file, like under file name, the .deb. That is what is being validated.
That was my question.
Probably the best thing we could put in that top.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, good find, Alan. So,
Right.
Dave, do you happen to know where this is actually stored? Because it's not in the status file or in the MD. Well, it's really MD5.
Would it be somewhere under var
looked it up on
lib
Tuesday.
package info add user something MD5 sums?
Well, so we look at that today, and that's the files.
Oh, that's
I
the
actually don't
individual
think it's
files.
here. Yeah, I actually don't think that it's in var lib package info. I think it's somewhere else.
Yeah, that's one of those things where it's processed as you're installing Debian packages, if I recall correctly. Take this with a huge grain of salt. There's a little database that gets created.
Right, but that's got to be somewhere because that's in my local cache. So that's got to be somewhere on disk, right?
It can be somewhere on disk. It can also be not there, right? So our solution would obviously have to be, if it is there and we can get it, then we can store that metadata.
I'm gonna go see if I can find that, because that looks like a fun Thursday adventure. So,
Okay. Cool. Well, then I guess the discussion is concluded for this issue. We're gonna try to include that if we can.
well, that just solves it for Debs, right? So you have this for everything else. And it comes back to the same question: is like, what is a package hash? And like this debate comes up in like a lot of the SBOM realms of like, okay, they have this field in SPDX and Cyclone, like, but what does it really mean? And there's debate there.
I mean,
right. So that I found where it is. It's in the apt cache, varlib, apt lists. That's the archive that I'm using. D64 Noble AMD 64. Noble.
My caveat from earlier on this is that directory is usually empty unless you do an apt update. So and you haven't done a clean. So it gets populated by operations. So it's going to be if it's there, we can get it. If it's not.
Yep.
Right. It's also worth saying that this isn't going to serve as an integrity check, right? Because we're just saying that, the MD5s under varlib dpackage info kind of serve as an integrity check because those are those were used like by Aptitude during the install as it unpacked things. So those might be an integrity check, but this is like written down by Aptitude. That's like, this is the digest of the thing I installed, but like that thing isn't around anymore. So we don't know whether the packages have been messed with after it, like post install.
Well,
right?
yeah, and on top, and like, I'm kind of curious of the other lines around this in this file. If you do like a -C5 or whatever on your grep, because like it could even be like, you do the install, you wait 5 days, you do an apt update, and now you have like updated hashes, and that would differ relative to what you actually installed. So
Yeah.
but like it looks like it has other info. Maybe you could pair it up. I don't know. Yeah, we'll have to look into this.
Okay.
So it might not be that we could very simply just add this for package and
But I'll put needs investigation on this and remove needs discussion, I think, Ruth.
I mean, like, I feel like one of the suggestions in the past was you take all of the claim to own files and some specific metadata, you sort it, and then you hash that. But I mean, that's also like a bit made up too. So
Right.
it's like, would
Well,
anyone ever be able to reproduce that? What's the usefulness of a package hash if you can't reproduce it?
Right. Well, and the user seems to want hashes on components so that they can like compare them to an allow list of packages or something, right? They want it later in the business process. And there's no reason to suppose that the other software running later in the business process is going to know how we hash D packages. So anyway, needs investigation and maybe needs the user who requested this to give us a little hint as to what's important to them about this. Hey, moving on.
Yeah, sorry, I was just rummaging around looking for where you could correlate this, and yeah, I'm failing at finding it.
Oh, is it
Oh
not
no,
on
I
the-
found it. I found
Yeah.
it. In
Ooh.
Yeah.
oh god,
Almost.
that file is that file there.
Exactly.
So it's that's the list of all the packages. That's where all that app source comes from and gets cached locally to my machine. That's where it came from. But obviously we don't know if that's still there because the container may have been built 6 months ago, and you know.
App has the ability, if you have like one installed and one that's available, it'll show both in that cache show output.
Mhm.
So there is a way to cross-reference like what you have installed with what that shows. But again, keep in mind, if you do a Docker run Ubuntu latest in Bash, var cache apt is empty, right? So that information doesn't populate until you start interacting with apt.
Cool. So what are we? What's next here? More investigation, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a needs investigation. We need to come up with
User,
a definition of package hash here. So
yeah, user gets back to us confirming what we want.
Mhm.
And I liked Alex's suggestion, but I understand that there are people that disagree with summing all the files. Like, how is that? What are you going to compare that against?
unless we create a tool that can do that. So
I propose that this no longer needs discussion because it's closed.
Yeah.
Just so it doesn't show up on the list. There we go.
Yep.
That was easy. Okay. Where are we? What time is it? We've got 10 minutes. Do you want to... Has anyone else got anything particular, or do I start rummaging around in the bug roulette?
well, I got one. It's in the chat just before the last link. So it's about like EPSS and Kev and new metrics and Grype and sorting of all things. And actually, and there's a branch too. I don't know if you wanted to run this just for like, just for showing too, but well, we'll start with this first. Okay, so recently we, added more data to the database, which we added EPSS as well as there's Kev known exploited vulnerabilities. So this is pretty useful in the sense that like now we have something that can, estimate threat. That's what EPSS is supposed to be. It's and something to show, hey, these vulnerabilities are being actively exploited. So right now we have like no sorting other than really by name in a Grype output. But the most common thing that folks do with this output is they go down the list to say, what's important for me to remediate? Like, what's the best way to really sort this? So this is a proposal on to bring in sorting and to bring it in a way that's useful for users. So bringing a new risk metric. And after lots of reading, it looks like the EPSS user guide is actually a pretty good spot or a pretty good kind of conclusion out of this, which is bring in a metric called risk, which approximates to threat times severity times impact. So threat, that's like the EPSS score, or like what are the, what's the likelihood of this particular vulnerability being exploited in the next 30 days? Severity, that's the CVSS base score, or if you don't have that, some equivalent string severity that you convert. And impact, there's a few different ways you can interpret that, but like in this case, I'm interpreting it as like, well, is it being actively exploited? If so, boost it some. And so that's the current formulation we have. But this actually ends up being a pretty good way to pretty easily sort by things that, things that are the most likely to be exploited soon, are the most severe, so very critical, and is or is not on Kev. Like, these things tend to float to the top, and everything else tends to float down and orders pretty well. So yeah, this is not going in like this week per se, but this is still open for debate. So if anybody has any opinions about this, please feel free to check out issue 1511 and add comments and thoughts to your heart's desire.
Shall I show you what it looks like?
So yeah.
Oh God, what is going on there? Don't know what happened there. So that's this column here, right?
Yeah, and there's also the EPSS percentile
yeah.
next to it. And you can run that one more time, but this time do -- sort - by, and then you can do risk.
Like that?
Mm-hmm. And there's other things that can be put in, like EPSS and severity, etc. But
that's cool.
Yeah, so like in this case, like
I was gonna say I haven't seen a 99 EPSS before. I don't think. Like, that's pretty cool.
yeah, I think it's something like 90 or 95% of the EPSS data is like skewed below like 0.1. But I mean, these are percentiles here, so this is going to be like a simple ordered list between 0 to 100. But it's percentiles, so not percentages. So, but this is the current proposals that get an output that looks like this. So what I like about adding both of these columns is, so the EPSS user guide has a particular way to look at using percentile to make a custom threshold. So like, I'm only going to choose like the top, say 10% of, so anything above like EPSS 90% or above is the only one I'm going to care about. They also have a couple other ways to look at it too. It seems to be a pretty good and well thought through set of recommendations there. So I think adding that column is useful all on its very own. Where also having risk, like the way that we sorted it, also kind of makes sense. If we sort this and we don't show the specific metric that we used, I think it's going to be hard to defend. It looks like we're not really sorting by anything, or we sort of sorted incorrectly, so to speak. So,
can I kindly ask that gets updated in the templates so that it shows up in things like this? Because that would be quite nice to be able to sort in here as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it should be.
That's I've just used your Grype, pointed it at the template in the repo, and that's what came out.
Oh, the in repo templates, or the examples.
Yeah.
Got it. Yes. They have not been updated. You're right.
Sweet. That is wonderful. Thank you for explaining that. Any other comments or suggestions or? Nope.
On to the next thing. Oh,
I'm interested in one thing in terms of your thought process on the percentile side, because the percentile is an interesting way to look at stuff, because the extremes are, let's say, the EPSS score, which is a probability of something happening in the future. Let's say all of the EPS scores are super small, like negligible probability of exploit, right? The percentiles would still be distributed, right? You'd still get 99% of EPSS scores are below this. So it's a great way to do a threshold, to say, I only want to look at the top N, but it doesn't tell you what the magnitude of the top N is. So yes, both of these columns in combination give you that full view, right?
Nice.
So I'm just kind of like reflecting on that. So I love the fact that you've got both columns. But I do have a question. Risk is something that is according to our analysis, but the percentile you're displaying is literally just the EPSS analysis, rather than the percentile of the findings within our own sorted risk analysis. Like for this output, another option I would think, and I'm curious what you think about that, is instead of the EPSS percentile, it's like the Grype percentile, right?
Yeah. So
Maybe
it's essentially like
this specific output rather than the global output, the global percentile, according to one of the sources used to calculate risk.
yeah. I mean, I haven't given much thought to that, mostly because like, EPSS. Actually, in my head, I wasn't going to include EPSS in the raw output at all until I was looking at, um, you know, some of the work that they have going into like, oh, well, this is trying to quantify this in terms of like coverage, efficiency, and effort.
Yeah.
With the understanding that like, well, teams only have so much budget, and some risk tolerance. I mean, you'll find folks in both camps for this too. Like they'll have all the budget and very low tolerance to risk. Thus, like they will remediate everything. And then you'll find folks that say we don't have a lot of time, don't have a lot of budget, but we have tolerance to risk, and thus it's more of like the other side of the fence. So we're only going to remediate the top 5%, so to speak. And that's what actually kind of convinced me to bring in EPSS at all. But to your point of, let me like translate what you're saying to maybe a slightly different question. Looking at the raw risk number isn't really tremendously useful other than to show that they're ordered. And so I think what you're saying is, well, if we change that to like a more of a percentile, then you get a more, tangible output as opposed to it being, some number multiplied by probably a really, really, really small number. I mean, because if you see back in that table, back in the example, like, I think half of that was like below like 0.1. We just say, instead of showing, we didn't want to say like, oh, it's 0, because they're not saying that the risk is 0 is not good. We just want to say it's really low. But like if we did a percentile here to what you're saying, well, then you are much less likely to show something that appears to be very low. So yeah, I could see that thought. I could see how that would be advantageous here.
Well, it's just an interesting like third piece of information. Like EPSS is an external percentile according to stuff. Risk is, according to the scoring function that you have written in the issue. But the risk percentile is just for this view, not according to the global world, but this specific set of findings, allows somebody to say, I only want to look at today or this morning, or I only have time for, according to effort and all of that, doing 10% of the total findings for this particular material. And you can't do that with just those two columns, but it's I'm also curious to see how it lines up with the EPSS percentile, but that's not.
It takes away the.
Sorry, can I just butt in with a question? Would you see that percentile being a variable that you could tweak? Like, so you could say, I have time for like the top 10% or the top 5% or.
Well, that would be like something where you would, it would be equivalent to doing like head-n.
Yeah.
Right.
And
okay.
Things, right. But if there was a risk percentile column here that was sitting next to this, the top one would be 100. The bottom one would be 0 always for every given finding. And in between, you would get a sprinkling of stuff between 0 and 100. Because the percentile means like every other finding is less than or equal to this one. And the bottom one says there are no findings where the risk is less than this one.
Thank you. Sorry, Alex.
No. That's and like the one.
Really?
I don't think I'd keep in that like, oh, we actually would literally say 0, but yeah, we would, given that the universe is going to be shrunk down to the set of results for one of these.
Yeah, and I'm not asserting that would be like but it's just like it's the last view of this, because you can trust, you could have the perspective that says, I only want to look at the top 10% according to EPSS, or I only want to look at the top 10% according to this finding.
Yeah. Well, I definitely haven't done that. I might, like, it would be an easy thing to go try out. So.
Interesting. This is cool. Yeah, really great.
Yeah, I like this.
Yeah,
Cool.
I tried like a bunch of other little different various formulations before this that I kind of just cut out of even mentioning here on this issue because it's either EPSS has already considered it and they just haven't spilled their secret sauce, or doing so is redundant in some other way. Like, one thing here is that EPSS user guide states explicitly, like, hey, if you have something like Kev, where it's being exploited, don't use EPSS. Just know that it's at the top of the list. And so this is where you basically say threat isn't somewhere between 0 and 1. It's just 1. You just pin it to 1 in those cases. Yeah, there was a bunch of other boosting or augmentation of this that was tried out in the past. And the more I looked, the more it's like, no, this is a very simple formulation, goes a long way. So that's all I had for this.
Nice. Thank you for that. I think we'll wrap up for today because time's getting on and everyone's got lunch or, releases to put out or both, maybe. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for explaining everything. And I'll wrap up some of these and put them out tomorrow as requests for comments in various places because there's some discussion outside of us that I think needs to happen as well and some input and, from the community. So I'll do that. Again, thanks. See you all again next Thursday for another chat about our open source stuff. Thanks to all of you and see you all later.
Do well.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Cheers.